everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. Today we are going to be taking a look at another antique bodice in my collection, and it happens to be this little lady right here. She's a little short for my frame right now, but we will be taking a much closer look at her in just a moment. The reason that I have chosen this bodice for today is because I actually pulled this one out yesterday as reference to the current project that I'm working on, which is my 1890s summer bodice. I wasn't sure how I wanted to do the collar, how that would be patterned, etc. And I remembered that I had a bodice in my collection that had a very similar collar to what I was going for. And it happens to be this one right here. So I pulled her out and I was able to figure out what to do with my collar. So yay, that video will be coming up next for you, I believe. So do make sure that you're subscribed so that you'll be notified when that next installment of the 1890s summer bodice project video comes up, which will be on Tuesday. So anyway, let's go ahead and take a close look at this lovely lady and her very large sleeves. I figured we would at least attempt to start looking at her by looking at her on the dress form. Obviously, she does not at all fit the dress form. And actually, as I was putting her on the dress form, it came to me that it's not really a size issue, like a waist size issue that's making her not fit. I think, I'm not positive, but I think this may actually be more of a child or a very young girl's bodice because the waist is actually plenty fine for this. You wouldn't know it by looking at it, but it should fit the waist. But it would fit the waist of the dress form down here, significantly shorter than the dress form. And the back is also super, super narrow. So again, we'll take a little bit of a look on here. We'll take a closer look at it flat where it can kind of be closed. So this is a cotton bodice. This is cotton fabric right here. And it's kind of a twill pattern, but it's a very soft twill. Of course, since it's twill, you can tell that it has collected all sorts of little hairs over time. That's just the bodice section though. The sleeves are actually a different fabric. They are a much more crisp fabric, I guess is the best way to say. And there's a bit of a sheen to them. It does make me wonder if there's actually maybe some silk in there. I feel like there's maybe still cotton, like it feels kind of like a polished cotton, but softer, because a lot of polished cottons didn't feel this way. And I know that's a terrible description, but like this is really quite drapey. And polished cottons usually were not. That could be a time thing, or it could be that this does actually have some silk mixed into it. Now, one of my favorite things about the sleeves are the fact that they are cartridge pleated. So I've stuck a pin in here just to help support her on the dress form, but you can see all of these cartridge pleats. There are so many of them. You can see the threads still in those pleats right in there. And the cartridge pleats go almost all the way around. They stop right here. So kind of at the armpit, if I zoom out a little bit, right at the lower part of the armpit, and they go all the way around the sleeve, and again, stop right about the armpit in the back as well. And I just love how densely that is pleated up. It's so wonderful, and it makes for some very nice, lovely, large sleeves. These are pretty typical sleeves, and honestly the bodice itself is pretty typical as well. And what I mean by that is that it is a one-piece leg of mutton sleeve. So it is kind of your standard pattern where the top goes very, very large and then it comes down nice and tight right around the elbow and comes into a nice fitted sleeve in the lower portion. But if you undid this whole thing, it would just be one piece of fabric. There are some interesting little tucks going on right here. And honestly, I don't know if this is a sewn thing or if this is just something that's happened over time where the outer sleeve has kind of sunk down on the inner sleeve, because there is an inner support sleeve in here too. We'll get into that in a little bit. But I think that may be the case where it's kind of like the interfacing or stabilizer or whatever that's here in the cuff is working quite well, and the rest of the sleeve has just kind of drooped down and has gotten kind of stuck there, because actually I can smooth these out upwards, I just can't pull them down lower. So like the bodice that I am working on, this one has what we're going to call a plastron, which is this sort of center front section that is different from the rest of the structure of the bodice. And this plastron is made out of the same fabric as the sleeve, as the center portion of the plastron, and then it's the same fabric as the bodice in this little pleat on either side. I'm not sure that I'm really going to be able to figure out exactly how this is constructed, like the plastron itself, but I can definitely show you how it is attached. And it is also edged with this nice lace, which goes all the way around and also goes around the collar up here. And actually that's the same lace that is down here on the cuffs as well. The collar is quite interesting, and we'll see this better when it's flat as well, but it's quite interesting because it has these little folded down sections here. Now, this is polished cotton, this folded down little flap right here. It's not attached, or at least not attached anymore, to the lower. I'm sure that it once was. That's probably what these stitches are right here along the edge, and they've just pulled out of the polished cotton. They must have been grabbing just the barest bare bit of the cotton, and it's true on this side too. It's completely detached over here. Both of the flaps from the base though are actually still tacked down to the collar. They're sewn in quite well here at the point, and you can see that it's just folded in on the inside with the raw edge there, but this would have been covered by this. However, this is a raw edge, which was probably why those stitches were able to pull out, because this polished cotton was never actually finished on the sides. The thing that I really like about this collar, and the reason that I was using it for my inspiration and education, is that it does wrap around the neck. So it finishes in the back with this very, very cute bow, but otherwise it's this long sort of strip. Once it leaves the plastron over here, it's a strip that just wraps around the collar. And I wish that I could actually like get this to fit all the way on the dress form to show you exactly how it connects, but I think I'll be able to show that to you flat as well. Let's take a quick look at the back, and then we'll look at the insides and see it flat. Now, if you've been following along with my 1890s bodice progress, which you can see actually in the background over here, you'll know that I took inspiration from the last bodice that I showed on this channel, which was also an 1890s bodice, and that had sort of a fan look going on here with pleats. This one kind of has a similar effect going on right here, but actually it takes it to a whole other level. So you can see that these have been hand sewn down with little sort of crisscrossy type stitches, or herringbone stitch. I don't do a lot of hand sewing, so I don't know all the stitch terminology, but it looks to me almost like the types of stitches that are used to hold boning in place. So very, very interesting. You can tell that it's just been pleated there and then sewn down with those hand stitches, and there are 3 of those pleats on each side meeting in the center back, and then it just kind of releases partway up the bodice. From back here, you can also see that these sleeves have actually been pieced. So they were quite wide. We already established just how large those sleeves are, but they did a nice job back here. They wound up having to piece their sleeves. So you can see there's a second piece that is running into the arm side from up here, and it just kind of tapers out right up here. And I believe again, yeah, right down here into the arm. So, and both sides are pieced similarly. So it was probably just that these sleeves were kind of too wide for the fabric. You can see also that there is some damage to this bodice on the exterior. There's a lot more damage actually on the interior, but you can see there's some, I'm thinking these might have been moth holes right here and just some wear up here. I've had this one for quite a long time. I believe I got it off of eBay, but I can't quite remember. It is one of the earlier pieces in my collection. But you can also see some of the ways that the bodice was put together back here, which is nice, as opposed to the last one that I examined, which was one large piece in the back. This one actually has this little inset piece right here off to the sides. It has it on both sides over here. And the inset pieces, when you're looking at it, it looks like it's a different fabric than the back, and that is because it is. This inset fabric piece is a twill texture, just like the front of the bodice. However, it still kind of looks like a different color, but the back is actually not twill at all. I know, right? It's a different fabric. Again, based on the potential moth holes, this may actually be a very, very lightweight wool. I'm not great at discerning antique fabrics sometimes, especially when they all kind of feel similar-ish, but I think that might be what we're looking here, is that the back is actually wool, and then we have the cotton, though it could be actually a wool twill also in the front too. But yeah, we've got potentially 3 different fabrics here, definitely at least 2 different fabrics, but again, this does seem like a whole different color than the other two. Okay, so funny story. I decided that I would go in and just take a closer look at the fabric and the difference between the front and the back, since it just seemed odd that one would be twill and one would not be twill. Actually, they're both twill. The nice thing about this bodice being in not great condition is the fact that you can actually look inside the bodice and discern that they put the back one on backwards. This is the twill side. So it's the same fabric. They just mixed it up. We've all done that, right? We've all taken a fabric that is a subtle one side like a twill and switched it around sometimes, and sometimes you notice too late, sometimes you just don't care, sometimes you just leave it as is for someone to find 130 years later and see, yep, this side is twill and this side no longer looks like twill. So yeah, that's what's going on here. And before anyone goes in and says, oh, they probably like let out those sections and that's why those weird pieces were in the back, that's not true either. I think it's, again, just like the twill direction is what's making it look different there. Because if you look at the lining, you can tell that there's not like additional pieces that have been added in the polished cotton section of the lining. Obviously, there are some weird pieces that have been added into the lining. However, I don't think these are actually new. It's honestly, I mean, it's hard for me to say for certain, but the pleats in the back, there are basting stitches that are sewn to this from those pleats. So I think that this was part of that. It is possible that this was done as a stabilizing effect. The same fabric, which this is like a kind of a silky fabric, the same fabric was also used in both of the fronts. So we have some of that navy blue silky fabric over here and along the binding down here, and then we also have it on this side up over here. So while there is a possibility that this was put on as a later edition, I really don't think it was, because this side is actually sewn right sides together to the lining, like this seam right here, it's sewn right sides together and then flipped so the seam is fully encased. It's also included down here in the what is looking like the other binding. So this is the other binding, this is that blue binding, and then we're back to the other binding, back to the blue. So I think that this was just done as the facing fabric right here, maybe a little bit of stabilizer here for the back. I'm really not sure why they selected the fabrics, but I think, it's not for sure, but I think that it is original to the bodice. So obviously the inside is a bit of a mess. This one of the interesting things about this one is that there is no boning, at least left in this bodice. And the only place where there might have been boning is this tape right here, because this tape has the general herringbone stitches like you get with boning channels. It looks like a boning tape. So my guess is that the boning has just come out of this tape at some point, though I could be wrong because it is still sewn shut at the top and at the bottom. So it could also be that this is just a tape that they were using to try to help stabilize the hooks for the closure. It's possible. Of course, they went off of it kind of at the edge, but I don't know. I feel like the person who made this is how I make bodices sometimes, where I just forget what I'm doing as I'm doing it and just be like, yeah, that's okay. So I very much relate to them. And they have fairly big messy whip stitches all through here, whipping those raw edges together. I believe the seams themselves were done on machine. They do look very, very uniform, and sometimes they have two seams because one wasn't enough. Actually, a bunch of times they have it on this one, they have it on this one. So there's a few where they've done the two. There's right here also. There's a few where they've done the two together. So yeah, the brown polished cotton is really the weakest part of this bodice. You can see that a lot of it over here is just shredded away completely, which is why we can look in here and see, oh yeah, the inside of the front looks like the back, which is good, you know, gives us some more insight. Again, a lot of times when you get a piece that is a little bit more damaged, you actually can see a lot more of the answers to how it was made. So that makes it pretty cool. So as I mentioned, it does close up the front with hooks on this side, its eyes on the other side. So we've got the hooks. There's a big gap right here at the top of the plastron. There's the one hook at the center front collar, and then we've got the other hooks down here. Quite large hooks, by the way. These are like hefty hooks compared to most bodices. And then over here on the other side at the center front, we have the eyes going all the way up, except again with that gap right there. And then I'll show you the collar closures in a minute, but that gets a little bit more complicated. You can see that the lace on the plastron has just really been whipped right to the edge. There's about a 1/4 inch overlap, and it's just been whipped, had its edge whipped right down all the way around, including up here. And this is the plastron section right here. So this plastron is backed with the twill, but you can see where it meets the bodice, it's actually just been pretty roughly whipped. So this is the center front of the bodice right here, where my finger is going. And then the plastron is from the exterior, it's laid on top of that. So now looking at on the interior, it looks like it's underneath. But this is finished off and then it's just whipped. So when they made this bodice, they just folded back the excess. So that's why we have this little bit going on right here. And it's just folded down. And then that's their nice clean edge that they've whipped the plastron to. So I had to pause there for a moment because I got confused. Or maybe they got confused, because really what should be happening on most bodices that have a sort of plastron or something like that that goes across the center front is that you would have a line of hooks and eyes right here on the center front, right here over here, so that those center fronts would meet together. However, we don't have that. We have hooks and eyes up here. Now I think what they wound up doing was that this edge right here that I'm holding where it's folded, I think that was supposed to be the center front on this side. And when they went to go add the plastron on, they were like, well, now there's like this random 1.5 inch thing, and like my hooks and eyes are off, and it's just gonna throw everything off and blah, 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 blah. So they're like, okay, well, let's just fold that in and just do one line of hooks and eyes so that this will become the center front, even though it's not, or something like that. I'm really not sure. It'd be interesting to see this on a person, like actually closed, or even on a dress form closed, because I think that's what's happening here. Because this side has a little bit of a fold back, so they may have also done it on this side too, but it doesn't have nearly as much over here. So I'm not really sure what they decided to do there, but yeah, normally we would have our edges like this, and then another line of bars or eyes or whatever over here where the plastron hits. We just don't have that. It's over here instead. So it's very funky. I really think that this person was sewing something they hadn't really ever sewn before. And again, I feel that hard. Let's look at the collar and what makes that also interesting. So the collar here along the actual bodice edge, we have a little banded collar. It's literally just a straight strip that goes all the way around from center front to center front, and that is what the bodice is put into. Then on top of that, we have this banded collar, the decorative one with the little fold backs on the front. And that starts right at the center back here and goes around, goes past the center front, laps around and comes back to the center back, just past the center back, and closes with hooks and eyes back there and hides it with the bow. So the thing is, this exterior collar, and the reason why we often don't see collars on 1890s bodices at all, is that this is actually kind of an afterthought. So the interior collar is fully finished, and then this collar is just whipped on there afterwards. But we really have two collars here. You can even see like where the lace is right in there. We have a whole separate collar, and then this one is just added onto the top. And that's why it's just already a band, so it can continue being a band around the outside. And then over here, this winds up closing. We have a hook and eye at the center front. There's a snap here, though honestly I don't know that that would be original, because I don't think that snaps were super common, but we do have snaps around the back, and then we have the eyes at the center back where it hooks in. So it could have been that these were originally some other closure, or it could have been snaps. I really don't know. But yeah, we have got those two corresponding snaps there, so that just goes around and closes up all nicely right there. The one other bit that I want to show you in here is the sleeve. So you can see that the interior of the sleeve is actually a different cotton than the bodice. This is that crispy polished stuff. This one is just a softer polished cotton, and this is much smaller than the exterior sleeve. And you can tell that because we don't have the cartridge pleating in here. We have a little bit of gathering because who wants to fit a fitted sleeve? So this still has a little bit of a puff to it, and then it's joined together, and this isn't really, like, they didn't really do much of anything. I mean, there are some whip stitches on there, but they're not actually including the lining. The whip stitches are just on the cartridge pleated section. So this is that sleeve down there. You can see this was actually seamed up by hand too on the inner sleeve. And when we go down to look at the cuff, you actually, right now you just see a black hole, I think, but the polished or sateen cotton goes all the way to the wrist, but then there is a facing right here of the twill, the same twill as the exterior. That's done as that cuff. So before, when I was talking about that other sleeve getting kind of hung up right here, it was getting hung up like where that facing is. So that's why it wasn't sinking any lower. There was probably a tack through that was catching the outer fabric from putting the facing in. And then we just have the lace whipped onto the bottom. So the last thing really that I want to talk about when we're looking at the bodice is the construction of the interior versus the exterior. So again, we do have this fairly lightweight polished cotton lining, and this is actually made up of an additional back piece than the exterior. So this seam right here, this doesn't exist on the exterior. That's why you can see there's no black fabric poking through at the seam like there is here, because this is that side panel that looked kind of different on the exterior, whereas this is literally just another panel that we are kind of compensating for by having all of those little tucks in the back on the exterior. We don't need this, but that is the shaping here. We have a center back seam and we have this side center back seam as well. And then we've got the side panel, and then the front. The front, by the way, has 2 darts in it, but really I feel like there's not a lot of fabric being taken out of those darts. So I will look at the measurements here in just a second, but I have a feeling our waist to bust ratio is very, very small, which is what makes me think also that this was potentially a child's outfit. So the waist here is actually fairly large compared to how small this bodice is. It's about 28 inches across, or around I should say. And the weird part is that the back is super, super narrow compared to the bust. So you can see there's almost like flaps over here where the back is only going to here and to here. And I had just measured it just by flipping it over, but the back is 14 inches across, which is the same width as the width of the waist. And so it's that 14 inches. And then the front, I was able to just kind of like manipulate it a little bit and measure here and then measure here. And the front is 19.5 inches. So the total is 33.5 inches around, and then the waist being 28. So we only have a 5.5 inch difference between waist to bust, and it's also super, super short. I mean, from the armpit down, it is 6.5 inches. So very, very petite. And so I'm really not sure. This could have been an older child, younger teenager type situation. This could have been just maybe a more, I don't want to say stout, but short and less curvy, I suppose, lady. It could have been either. I like to think that this is kind of a teenager making her first bodice because there are so many oddities to this bodice, but I mean, we will honestly never know. Also, since I think a lot of people are probably going to ask, I don't think that this is a morning bodice. We do have the addition of the white lace. Now, it's possible that this could have been a morning bodice that then lace was added to, making it not a morning bodice anymore, or this could have been a later stage of mourning. Either of those is possible, but in first mourning, you definitely would not have white lace added to your bodice. And that's really all I have to show you. So that is all that I have for you today on this bodice. I was really excited that I was able to go into my own personal collection and pull out a bodice that would actually teach me how to properly assemble my project. I feel like that is one of the goals of collecting antiques to me, is actually being able to go in and use them as full-on reference. So between the collar on this bodice and that fan pleating section on the last bodice that I showed you, I am really excited to just incorporate all of these actual 1890s elements into my bodice project. That's just so cool to me. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week with my sewing vlogs out on Tuesdays and other costuming content like this out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below. I'd also like to give a special shout out and special thank you to all of my patrons, especially those at the Romantic, Victorian, and Edwardian level tiers, and those are Angela, Sharon, Audra, Carlin, Maria, Mirage, Sarah, Tiffany, Bobby, Elizabeth E, Elizabeth W, Jean, and Vivian. Thank you again so much to all of my patrons, and if you are interested in joining my Patreon and having early access to videos, live chats once a month, special bonus pictures, and all sorts of other things, you can find that link to my Patreon down in the description below. Again, thank you all so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you all very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!